All right, guys. So today we are going to be checking out two different pair of IEMs from the same company. And the two pairs that we're going to check out are the Kiwi Ears Orchestra Lite and the Kiwi Ears KE4. So the first thing is I've never tried any IEMs from Kiwi Ears before, so I went into these completely blind. I didn't have this preconceived notion that I knew what one pair was going to sound like, because one thing with testing a lot of earbuds, headphones, and IEMs, you come to the realization that a lot of companies tune their products the exact same way. So what I mean by that is, I've tested so many different Sony products. You can generally tell a Sony product just from the initial sound. It has this similar feeling to it. They kind of go for this same tuning, and it's just similar across a lot of their different products. So when a company can come out with two different products and actually have two completely different sounds or two completely different approaches, that is already interesting. And so the first thing that I want to point out, the differences between both of these, is the Orchestra Lite is using 8 balanced armature drivers. So there's no dynamic driver, there's no planar driver, no electrostatic driver. Like, that is just relying on balanced armature drivers to handle the lows, the mids, and the highs. Now, it is using a 3-way passive crossover system, so it is still trying to separate the lows, the mids, and the highs with what each driver is handling. And I'm going to say this, the Orchestra Lite is definitely going for a more natural and a balanced approach. Now, I don't mean neutral, I don't mean flat or reference. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but the KE4 is a lot more amped up, in my opinion. In fact, even on Amazon, it says gaming IEMs, but this pair is using two 10mm dynamic drivers and two balanced armature drivers. Now, one of the balanced armature drivers is a Knowles driver, and then the other one is a custom one that they've made specifically for these. So that is a completely different approach than having 8 balanced armature drivers by including 2 dynamic drivers and then bringing it down to 2 balanced armature drivers. So definitely 2 different approaches there. But the KE4 is also using a 3-way passive crossover system. As far as when it comes to the cables on both of these, now the Orchestra Lite has a 4-core oxygen-free copper cable. It is using the 2-pin connection, which again is probably the most common when it comes to IEMs. And then the part that plugs in is a 3.5mm just standard headphone jack. And there's no adapters in here, so 3.5mm is the only one that you get. With the KE4, they do include some extra metal filters. Now, this isn't to change the sound in any way, but this is like if you get earwax or anything built up on your original ones, or they get damaged or something like that, you could just easily switch them out with these other metal filters. And then as far as the cable, it's a thinner cable with the KE4. It still doesn't feel cheap, but it is using that same 2-pin connection, and it is also using that same 3.5mm headphone jack connection. And again, with this pair, the same with the Orchestra Lite, there is no adapters, so 3.5mm is all you get out of the box. Now, as far as some of the other accessories, they both come with the exact same case. The Orchestra Lite is going to give you more ear tips. You actually get 3 different styles of silicone ear tips, where the KE4, you're only getting 1 style of ear tips. Each of these silicone ear tips are going to give you a slightly different sound signature, so do keep that in mind. Now, looking at these from as far as using them and the comfort on both, I did find the KE4 to be a little bit more comfortable, and maybe that's just because it's slightly lower profile. There's a little less weight on these. It's not a drastic difference. I'm going to say that both of these are very comfortable IEMs. I do believe that you can wear both of these all day without having any kind of discomfort issues. Now, as far as using these, both of these are extremely easy to drive. You don't necessarily need an amp to be able to get decent volume out of these. The Orchestra Lite comes in at 16 ohms with a sensitivity level of 112 decibels, where the KE4 comes in at 28 ohms with a sensitivity level of 102 decibels. So really, between the two, the KE4 is slightly harder to drive, but again, this is like too close to even say that there's a huge difference. So you can plug straight into a phone, a tablet, laptop. You're going to get really good volume out of any of those, just no problem. But again, I'm going to say that you need an amp to really kind of pull out the lows, the mids, and the highs a little bit more. It doesn't have to be anything expensive. Again, I have used some simple, just inexpensive Moondrop amps that use the USB-C connections. They're like $50, and that in itself makes a huge difference just plugging straight in to a phone like the Pixel Fold. So now let's get into the sound. And here is where there is the biggest difference between both of these IEMs. They're both aimed, in my opinion, at two completely different audiences. Now, the Orchestra Lite, again, has a more refined sound. I feel like it is a lot more detailed. I feel like the bass is a lot more controlled. Again, a cleaner, brighter sound, where the KE4, it's more boosted, it's more amped. And when it says that it is a gaming IEM, the low end on these are a little bit more bumped up. They allow the low end in the KE4s to be a little bit more loose so that it kind of has that subwoofer type feel, where the Orchestra Lite, even though it definitely has plenty of punch in the low end, it's just more tightened up. Again, it's more refined than the KE4. And from a sound standpoint, I actually prefer the KE4 because I honestly like things to seem a little bit more boosted, a little bit more aggressive, as long as like the low end doesn't come in and roll over the mids and the highs. Now, when it comes to the mids and the highs, this is where I feel like the KE4 is taking a warmer approach. Now, it could just be because the KE4s have a little bit more low end, so that's kind of dulling out the mids and the treble a little bit, or at least bringing them down so they're not harsh or very in your face, where the Orchestra Lite has a lot more details. It's bringing out the mids and the treble a little bit more. And I do feel like, especially at certain higher volumes, the treble can be a little harsh. It can have a sibilant sound in S's. The mids are definitely more forward in the Orchestra Lite than it is the KE4s. So you are going to hear vocalists a little bit closer to you. It's going to stand out from the rest of the music a little bit better in the Orchestra Lites than it does the KE4s. But the KE4s, in my opinion, just has more of a natural feel to them. It just feels smoother. And again, I think that's because it has that low end that's kind of warming up the rest of the sound. Both of these are excellent in their own right. They just have completely different approaches. Now, when it comes to the soundstage and sound imaging, the Orchestra Lite is a little bit more open than the KE4s. And both of these just do a really good job of being able to tell where sounds are coming from. So my overall opinion is this. I was extremely impressed with what Kiwi ears had, with these being the first two pairs that I've ever checked out from them. I like the fact that they have completely different approaches. They're for two completely different audiences. So this is definitely a company that caught my attention with both of these. I was very impressed, and these I've kind of slept on. I've seen other people review them, and I kind of brush them to the side, and that's kind of easy to do because the IEM market is pretty flooded right now. It's nice to venture out and check out some things from some different companies, and I was very impressed with what Kiwi ears had with these. But guys, that's my video on both the Kiwi ears Orchestra Lite and the Kiwi ears KE4. Thank you so much for checking out this video. Thank you so much for checking out all the other videos. And as always, make sure to stay tuned for more.